The opinions expressed on the following program are strictly those of the guests and do not necessarily reflect the views of WCZT, Regional Media, Coastal Broadcasting, personnel, or advertisers. Money Talk with Melanie, brought to you by MrCreditRepair.biz.
Money Talk with Melanie features lively discussions of a wide range of global, domestic, and kitchen table financial topics. Money Talk with Melanie on 98.7 The Coast.
Welcome back to another edition of Money Talk with Melanie here in beautiful Wildwood, New Jersey. It's getting nippy out, and I am not for it. Bring back the 75, 80 degree weather, please. But we are here in Wildwood, New Jersey on 98.7 The Coast. My guest this hour will be obstetrician and maternity mortality expert, Dr. Alan Lindemann. He's going to talk to us tonight about safe births and post-Roe maternal health care. Should be a really interesting conversation. I'm going to get back to that in just 1 second. My guest the second hour, the 8 p.m. hour, is e-commerce strategist Khierstyn Ross. She's going to discuss early stage growth for online physical product brands using Shopify and Kickstarter. So I'm really excited about that. One of the things that I love about doing this show, Money Talk with Melanie, is that I get to talk about a lot of different things, right? And you may be asking yourself, why in the world is she having an obstetrician on Money Talk with Melanie talking about post-Roe maternal health care? Well, I'll tell you why. You cannot ignore, with all the chattering on both sides of the aisle and pro-abortion and anti-abortion people, you cannot ignore the money factor that is involved in abortion, in that type of, I don't call it healthcare. I refuse to call it healthcare. It is not healthcare, in my opinion. And, I'm not even going to elaborate on that. You all have common sense. You know what I mean. But there's a money factor involved, and some of the most prevalent abortion providers are not very transparent about how much money they make, or they are not being honest about the numbers. The math is really fuzzy. I'm looking at you, Planned Parenthood, with we only do 3%. 3% of our services are abortion. Buffoonery. Anyway. And from a business perspective, it is very easy to figure that out. It's very easy to work out that accounting. If you don't want us asking questions, just separate the businesses. It's very simple. Very simple. You could just do it that way. Separate the accounting. Very simple. You could do it that way. I'm sure you guys have goo gobs of money. As a matter of fact, you received millions of dollars in COVID money so that you could stay open. I'm sure you can find a handy dandy accountant to work that out. But anywho, we're going to talk to Dr. Lindemann, who's going to talk to us about the importance of healthcare, what healthcare is and what healthcare isn't, and how post-Roe laws have affected healthcare and how it's going to affect you, because I do think that is also very important. We're also going to talk about his book that he co-wrote, which I thought was very important as far as the money issue is concerned. The book that he co-wrote, I want to make sure that I get the title correct, is called Modern Medicine, What You're Dying to Know. And it's a consumer action guide about how to navigate the United States healthcare system. So this is also a very important topic. And I think that Dr. Alan Lindemann will be super handy dandy in helping us out with both topics. And then we're going to switch gears. Totally switch gears is what I love about this show in hour 2, and talk to Khierstyn Ross about early stage growth for online physical products. So like if you sell jewelry, if you sell clothes, if you sell different products, how do you get your business started? How do you get your branding done using Shopify and Kickstarter? I've heard of both, but I don't know specifically what they do. So I figured if you're an entrepreneur, you might want to know. And Khierstyn Ross is our person who is going to tell us that. But before we get to any of that, oh gosh, I have 4 minutes to talk about news. Okay. Let's talk about a little bit about news. The Biden administration just doing what they do. Have you heard Joe Biden talk about how much he's done for the country? He has done so much. In fact, he said curiously, I almost laughed out loud, Name a president who has done more in the time that I've done it in. I'm like, you mean more to ruin the country, sir? Like, what? What are we talking about? So the latest in President Biden helping the country out is he's helping gig workers out. The rule that he has proposed is that gig workers are to switch their, what's the word I'm looking for? To switch how they're categorized. So a lot of people who do gig work rely on that side hustle so they can make ends meet and so that they can do it without a lot of drama, right? But no, the Labor Department on Tuesday said that a new proposal would make it more difficult for companies to classify their workers as independent contractors. And why this is from the company's perspective is if they're independent contractors, then the independent contractor, if you're familiar with the 1099, that means you get paid with the 1099 and none of the taxes come out. On the other side of that, that means the businesses don't have that obligation as well. And it frees businesses of other obligations associated with having people under their full employ. So, of course, just like almost every other financial or economic policy coming out of that administration, this is going to hurt small businesses. It's going to hurt gig workers, independent contractors. Like, one of the great things about being an independent contractor is supposed to be that more mobility that you have, that you can keep most of your profits. It really is just creating an opportunity for businesses not to invest in their gig environments and to just overburden small businesses. And it's just very sad to see. I don't know why some people, policy-wise, I'm looking at you, Biden administration, think that small businesses have money trees. But you're talking about a man who has never had a private industry job that I'm aware of, and has always had a government check. So no wonder he doesn't get it. But almost every policy they put in place just serves to damage small businesses, and this is just another proposal that's planning to do that. It is so super irritating. Okay, I don't know if I got that point across that I'm really mad about that, but I am super mad. But in the good news category, I guess, good news maybe, free weekly credit reports are going to be available through the end of 2023. And there are a couple of reasons why you might want to check yours. They're now available from the 3 major credit bureaus through the end of 2023, like I said. And the credit reports, of course, can help you spot areas where you need to improve your finances or if there's any errors that you might want to dispute. Fun fact, there are different things affect your credit score differently. Like there's percentages, there's scales, and each credit reporting agency, and there's more than 3, by the way. There's scores of credit agencies, but there's 3 main ones. So it's important to check that out. If you're not monitoring your credit, you probably should be. And it's 7:10. It's time for a commercial break. So you are listening to Money Talk with Melanie. Our first guest coming up is Dr. Alan Lindemann. Very excited to have him. He's going to talk to us about maternal health care post-Roe. Very excited to have him. And we'll be back on the other side of the break.
Money Talk with Melanie, brought to you by MrCreditRepair.biz.
Money Talk with Melanie features entrepreneurs, CEOs, and politicos who are experts in their fields. Money Talk with Melanie. Money Talk with Melanie on 98.7 The Coast.
Money Talk with Melanie, brought to you by MrCreditRepair.biz.
Money Talk with Melanie features lively discussions of a wide range of global, domestic, and kitchen table financial topics. Money Talk with Melanie on 98.7 The Coast.
Welcome back. Our guest this first hour is obstetrician and maternity mortality expert, Dr. Alan Lindemann. He's going to talk to us about safe births and post-Roe maternal health care. Our guest today, Dr. Lindemann, is also known as the Rural Doc, MD. He's an obstetrician and maternal mortality expert who, in his nearly 40 years of practice, has delivered around 6,000 babies and achieved a maternal mortality rate of 0, which is astounding, quite honestly. Dr. Allen is the author of the forthcoming book, Pregnancy Your Way. He is inspiring women to learn how to steer their own pregnancies and deliveries, as well as their long-term overall health, with helpful resources at his new website, pregnancyyourway.com. Welcome to the program, Dr. Allen.
Thank you very much, Melanie. I appreciate the chance to come on to your radio show.
I am so excited to have you on, and that is truly, I was telling the producer during the commercial break that about your zero mortality rate and 6,000 babies. I was like, that is amazing.
Well, it's been fun, and I've certainly spent a lot of time, and it's been a good time talking with my patients, their husbands, their children, to get to know who they are so that we can make a good plan for them when they go home.
Yes, and I'll tell you, as I was doing show prep earlier today, I was looking through your materials. I'm 52 years old. I have absolutely no intention on having any kids, but I did share your information with friends who have just had kids or have kids on the way, because I thought it was just so comprehensive, well written, like very easy to understand. I just thought it was great. His websites, by the way, pregnancyyourway.com and LindemannMD.com, LindemannMD.com. I just needed to share that. Just really impressive. And I have all these talking points, 75% of which we probably won't get to, but there was just so much information there. Just great information there.
Well,
and go ahead. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Yes, it's just really good, very impressive. So where would you like to start? Because there's, I'm going to let you start. Actually, I'm going to start here. You also co-wrote a book with Diane Haugen. I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly.
It's Haugen, and she's my wife.
Oh!
That was 30 years ago, called Modern Medicine, What You're Dying to Know.
Yes, and it's a consumer action guide about how to navigate the United States healthcare system, and that is so needed because it is so complex.
Yes, it gets to be more complex every year, and a lot of it is pretty much unnecessary.
Now, why do you say it's pretty much unnecessary?
Well, for example, our first chapter in our book is called Big Business Medicine, and when one hospital buys another hospital, we kind of wonder who pays for that, but it's the public in higher priced insurance care. So that, all we'd have to do is stop those purchases, and the insurance rates would at least level out.
Instead of decline, right? I mean, instead of increase, which is what it constantly does.
Yep.
And that's, the complaint that people have around the world about United States healthcare, and, I can't say that they're particularly wrong about that.
Well, they aren't. You probably are too young to remember this TV commercial. It had to do with a vacuum cleaner, the most expensive vacuum cleaner in the world, and darn well worth it. Well, we have the most expensive healthcare in the world, but not darn well worth it. So that's one of the big problems we have. So where does the money go? I'll give you another example. About 50 years ago, somebody wrote a book calling nurses the handmaiden of doctors. And after that, the amount of nurses, or the need for nurses with primary care nursing, quadrupled. So we actually created a nursing shortage. And one of the ways we deal with that is locums nurses. Now, the locums nurses make up to the company that hires the locums makes up to $100 an hour for that one nurse. The nurse might get paid $40 or $50 an hour, but again, you got people in the middle making tons of money for actually doing no work.
Oh, that's horrific. And I can imagine, as someone doesn't go into a field like obstetrics because they don't care about people. So I can imagine, because you care so deeply about people, this has to be distressing.
Well, it certainly has been distressing, and one of the ways I've dealt with it is, for most of my life, I've had my own practice. So, if insurance pays for 8 visits, but I give them 15, I don't get paid for those extra 7 visits, but I give them anyway, and I only have me to to complain to about it. But it's one of the ways I think that I have achieved the zero mortality rate.
And now, are there specific practices that have led you to the zero mortality rate? Because as I'm sure you're aware, that there are specific communities that just statistically have higher mortality than other communities. And you know, we could do a whole show on why that is or isn't the case. But is it the level of care that people receive, and is it so different from other levels of care, and that's how you got to that zero mortality rate, which is, like I said, miraculous. I've never heard of that.
Well, in the first place, I've had fun, and I think that I've enjoyed seeing my patients. I've enjoyed seeing their children, their husbands, but what it took was 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I did that for several decades. And that worked for my patients. And, you know, right now we have a real sad problem with our maternal mortality rate, and that is violent death in pregnant women and postpartum. So violent death comes into three categories. It's suicide, homicide, and drug overdose. And now these three things are the number one cause of maternal mortality. And measuring, of course, like the CDC does, up to 1 year postpartum. But these things are things that we should be dealing with. Like, one of the things I did with my practice was to identify patients who were at risk and try to head them off at the pass. I never had anybody suicide, obviously, or any homicides. But these are very important issues which, according to the CDC and according to me, they should not exist. All these deaths should be preventable.
Okay, and how are they preventable? Like I'm speechless. So I just surprised to hear you say that. Okay, so how are they preventable?
Well, in the first place, like I said, you invite the mom, the dad, the kids to see how the family functions. Do they respect each other? Do they care for each other? Can they exchange ideas in a civil way? And you can see how they treat their children. And if I think there's going to be a problem, I usually try to address it. One of the things I found was that if I could get dads to come to prenatal care, that was about 2/3 of my battle with dads. And sometimes, you know, postpartum, especially if you have a husband or an intimate other who is passive dependent, they see that the baby is competition.
Yes.
So they go some other place for their attention. But if you divide suicide and homicide into groups, the Caucasian women have more suicide. And it's estimated that 80% of them either are getting psychological care or have gotten psychological care in the last year. So these groups are already identified. We're just not treating them. One of the problems is that OB care does not cover behavioral health. As a matter of fact, I think if you talk to 99% of obstetricians, they wouldn't know what you're talking about.
What?
Yeah, the single concession to behavioral health that most obstetricians make, it's called the Edinburgh Depression Scale, so it measures. But if you ask women what they don't want the sheet of paper. They want somebody they can talk with.
Of course. That makes perfect sense. And so as part of what I hear you saying is, as part of the prenatal care, someone to talk to about being scared out of your mind that you're pregnant and all of the things that I would imagine come with that, there's nobody to talk to unless you're pursuing that as a separate avenue. It's not an integrative kind of thing.
That's right. We need to move into that area when we train our young obstetricians, and it may take a decade or two to get that done. That's one of the things I hope to accomplish, is to raise public awareness of the fact that this does need to be done, so that our public can start putting some of the heat on some of these organizations that could actually start that kind of training. Another problem is there's kind of a turf war in medicine, so that if I found a lady who was depressed, the average wait to get her in to see a psychologist or a psychiatrist would be 3 or 4 months. Well, they can commit suicide lots of times in 3 or 4 months. So that's really not a good answer. But again, when I was really practicing on my own, I would, if I had patients who got depressed, I would see them right away on the day they called. And I had a psychiatrist I could call. We could talk about the treatment that was needed. I could start some antidepressants, anti-anxiety agents, and then she would see the patients the next week, so they did not fall through the cracks. But it's really hard to get an appointment with a psychologist. Sometimes it takes even 6 or 9 months, and it's harder to see a psychiatrist. So we need to make this all smoother and more responsive to patients.
That's amazing, and I had no idea that was that huge of an issue. And I also didn't know that you could take antidepressants while you were pregnant. I was always under the impression that was a no-no.
Well, it's now considered to be a reasonable thing. There are several antidepressants that are popular during pregnancy, Prozac, Paxil, Zoloft, those are among some of them. I've always found that for postpartum, Effexor work best because what happens postpartum, if you give them one of those, they're perfectly happy to sit and watch TV all day long. But postpartum moms need to be motivated, and the Effexor served to motivate them. So this was the best antidepressant postpartum.
Wow, that's incredible. I mean, I'm sure you're enlightening the audience just as much as you are enlightening me on this particular topic. Now, you're a rural doctor. You're AKA, if you will, otherwise known as, is the rural doc. And one of the things that you talk about are the disparities in rural areas as opposed to urban areas when it comes to healthcare. Can you describe a little bit what you think are contributing factors, which you see as somebody who's on the front lines and a doctor? I think that, politics, political pundits, like admittedly like myself, play their side and say their piece, but they're not on the front lines. So I wanted to hear what you, as a doctor, see as somebody on the front lines in this particular area. Well,
for years I was on the front lines in a much bigger town. Now our nearest town is 650 people. I live a couple miles out of town, and all I can see out my windows now is grass and trees.
That's beautiful.
I decided to end up in what we call a healthcare desert in North Dakota. And as it turns out, if you look at healthcare deserts, about 80% of North Dakota is a healthcare desert. So we were out here all alone, and it was particularly complicated when we had COVID running because a lot of times we couldn't send our patients anywhere. So, under the best of circumstances, say, for example, I have a patient come in with a heart attack. It may take me 2 hours of phone calls just to try to find some place to send this patient. And we did a lot of COVID management here. Most of it was outpatient because we would see the patients on the day they called, and in that case, treating them early, we could treat them easily, and they didn't have some of the complications. So we didn't have a lot of patients in the hospital. I think probably at one time we'd maybe have 3 or 4. But you have to keep yourself together, and you really have to have a batch of priorities. And one of the things we like to do is to get ready for the patients before they come in, and of course make sure they get sent to the right places.
That makes a lot of sense. I'm sorry, go ahead.
It's lonely sometimes, yes.
I'll bet it is. I thought I lived in a rural area. I do not. Now that I definitely have more than 650 people where I live, and I live in a semi-rural area. I think we're kind of a hybrid, but you really are kind of out in the middle of nowhere. But they need you. Do you do concierge care now because of your geographic situation?
Well, I tell you what, Melanie. I am soon to be 75, so I'm pretty much doing this, and I plan to spend the rest of my life trying to raise awareness for preventing depression, preventing suicide, preventing homicide. And incidentally, we talked about suicide prevention. We didn't talk about homicide prevention. And homicide prevention is the most common cause of behavioral health problems with women of color.
That's stunning.
Yeah, it's something I haven't seen. When I was busy with my OB practice, sometimes up to 45 babies a month, when I was that busy, I didn't see suicide. I didn't see homicide. But if you look at the people, if you try to figure out who is at risk for homicide, there are a couple different things to look for. One is intimate partner strife. In other words, how is that relationship working? Another thing is criminal activity. Is there something in the past? And another problem is present criminal activity. So these are the three things that really speak to us about homicide risk for women of color.
Now, I would imagine that those same risks apply to women who are not women of color, those same factors, because those factors have nothing to do with color. I would think that a white woman who's involved in criminal activity or past criminal activity or has relationship strife in their relationship or strife with the dad specifically would also be at high risk. But I think what you're saying is, statistically speaking, it just seems to land more on women of color.
It unfortunately does. Women of color have a much less suicide rate than white women. So in that way, they're much better off. And white women have much more suicide than black women have homicide. So the problem still is with white women, and it turns out that many of them have some college, many of them are married or in a long-term relationship. So these are the people you would think wouldn't be having trouble. But in my experience, the people who have the biggest trouble adjusting to pregnancy and postpartum are the moms who think nothing is going to change, and the dads who think nothing is going to change. They make no room for the idea that, yes, everything's going to be different now, but it could also be considered to be better now.
Okay. Now that's an interesting point. Things are going to change, but they're going to be better. But I would imagine it's super nerve-wracking thinking that you have this little life that you're responsible for, and it's literally your job to keep that person alive. I can't keep a plant alive. Sometimes if my dog didn't bark, I'm not sure he would get fed. But you can't do that with a whole human life. That is a daunting task, and in my opinion, I think a lot of people don't take it seriously enough.
Well, I think you're right about that, and then there are people who take it probably too seriously. Years ago, when I was a resident back in the late 70s, we would make rounds on our patients, and the nurses would come in and they'd say, well, this one is ready to go home, this one isn't, the milk isn't in yet, the baby can't breastfeed. And we would then say, okay, fine, keep them for another day or keep them until they're ready to go. Today, it's wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. You're out in a day, whether you're ready to or not.
And that has to do with the money, right? That has to do with the insurance companies.
That is strictly to do with a crude way of insurance companies trying to control cost. It does not control cost because, in the first place, it just increases the cost of the day. The other problem is that if you look at the babies, those babies who are going home with those moms and dads who aren't ready to take care of them, twice as many wind up in the hospital for failure to thrive when they only stay in the hospital for one day. So there's a study that compared vaginal delivery moms to C-section moms. As it turns out, the C-section moms were in the hospital for 3 days, and they had half of the amount of failure to thrive hospitalizations at 6 months. So keeping the mom and dad and the baby in the hospital till they're ready to go home would solve a lot of problems and save a lot of money.
That is maddening. You're listening. We're up against the commercial break. You're listening to Money Talk with Melanie. We're speaking with Dr. Alan Lindemann. Dr. Alan, he calls himself, also known as the Rural Doc, and he's dropping some serious knowledge about money, healthcare, and the role it plays in obstetrics, and really the survival of these babies. Just really interesting information. We will be back on the other side of the break to talk post-Roe maternal care. We'll be right back.
Money Talk with Melanie, brought to you by MrCreditRepair.biz.
This is important because it's your money. Your money. Money Talk with Melanie. Money Talk with Melanie on 98.7 The Coast.
Money Talk with Melanie, brought to you by MrCreditRepair.biz.
Money Talk with Melanie on 98.7 The Coast.
Welcome back to Money Talk with Melanie. Our guest this hour is the Rural Doc, or Dr. Alan, as he likes to be called, who has has delivered 6,000 babies, let me put it that way, and has a 0 mortality rate, which is just amazing to me. I want to, and he's just really, the first segment was excellent, gave us some great information, and I want to move into a little how policy and more how money affects healthcare. Now, as my guest, I want to be completely transparent with you about me being politically, ideologically pro-life, and not to say that I'm not a fan of abortion would be an understatement. But part of the reason why I want to talk to you about this is because from a medical perspective, I'm hoping that we can get into what constitutes that or not, especially since you have a 0 mortality rate, and how the Roe decision affects maternal care, and how you see it affecting maternal care. I'm very interested to hear what you have to say about that.
Well, the Supreme Court can do whatever they want to do, and they don't have to really care whether they represent the public or not. So they have made a decision here which is quite unpopular. And one of the things that we see happening is that young women between 21 and 25 who ordinarily don't turn out to vote are turning out to vote in droves in the state elections. So we're going to be seeing a lot of activity, a lot of things, tumult, a lot of things going on. One of the problems with the decision to overcome Roe v. Wade is that the people who are most hurt by this, that is, the socioeconomically deprived, are the ones who are going to see the biggest problems, the biggest, not getting the care that they need. For example, I read a story about a lady who went to a country in Europe, the only one that wouldn't allow pregnancy termination. So she was 38 years old, first-time pregnancy, and her water broke. Well, nobody would do anything with that because they could still hear a heartbeat. So she was stuck with this essentially life-threatening situation and no possibility of having a term, viable baby. So eventually she got a plane trip to Spain, which of course was a big job all in itself, in getting her on the plane. So these are the kinds of things we're going to be seeing more of, and it's going to be, I would say, a bigger problem. And one of the backlashes that we see is that doctors who live in a state where abortion is legal, and if they prescribe across a state where it's not, but into another state where it is legal, they can give medications by e-scription, in other words, remotely. And I'm not really a fan of that. I think they're letting themselves in for a lot of trouble, but that's just some of the ways that we're seeing the backlash of this decision.
Okay, so there's medical, there's like a medicinal, I guess, termination, right? And then there's the surgical termination. And what you're saying is that doctors are, like in the case that you described, doctors are doing e-scripts, which kind of takes you across state lines. And are you practicing medicine? And that's like, I could imagine that gets dicey, right?
Well, nobody in their right mind could answer that question. It is dicey, and it's going to stay that way. I do think that these doctors are letting themselves in for a potential lawsuit, potential trouble. I think that we're going to see attorney generals coming after them from state to state. So I don't think it's a good idea. I don't think it's good medical care, because patients need to be seen. They need to sit, 2 or 3 feet away from their provider. And they need, if they have trouble, they need to be able to find that doctor again and come back for care if they need more care.
So, okay, so how does the Roe decision prevent that from happening?
Well, part of the problem that we're having with Roe is that doctors are really afraid of and we're not talking about elective abortions. They're afraid of doing, for example, a tubal pregnancy that is also incompatible with the life of the baby. It's often incompatible with the life of the mother. But I recently read a story about a lady who had gone in 5 times to the emergency room with her ectopic pregnancy, and nobody would treat her. It turns out that her ER bill was $80,000.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, right. Oh, gee. And she would come in and get methotrexate because, they didn't want to. She saw ER doctors who were not going to do any surgical procedure. They didn't call any obstetrician. I don't know quite exactly why not, but eventually it turned out to be life and death, bleeding to death with her. And she didn't die, but she had a lot of trips to the ER for, like I said, that large amount of money. I don't know how that's even going to get paid for.
My understanding from, I sat in on a webinar, I don't know, a month or so ago, and I'm sure as an obstetrician you've heard of this organization. There's a pro-life obstetrician organization. I can't recall the name of it off the top of my head, but my understanding from them and on their website is that the Roe decision does not cover things like those kinds of pregnancies you described, that's not part, that you would still be allowed to do that.
Well, all of this has to do with how does the individual provider see this law, and how is it going to be manifest in the individual states. Doctors are really running scared from this. They don't want to have their licenses taken away. They don't want to be visited by the Attorney General. So they're very much erring on the side of being conservative. And I have another little story to tell you. And this is years ago, before Roe v. Wade was made. I had a friend who was early pregnant, never had a heartbeat, but had a placenta, and she had a positive pregnancy test. Well, her doctor made her wait for 3 months until the pregnancy test turned negative before he would do a DNC on her. And she was sick during that time. So it was his private decision. And I think that's one of the things that we're going to be seeing. Doctors are scared.
So what I really, I'm not sure that the Roe decision is the problem then. And listen, me not being a medical doctor, and this is really why I wanted to have you on, is because I wanted to hear from somebody who's been there and done it, what that looks like for you. And I would have thought, and this is really, now that I'm thinking about it a little further, that Roe decision, I don't think addresses the specific medical evaluation. And I think that it seems like that's where doctors are having trouble, and that's where it can possibly become a barrier to getting care. But what the talking heads are doing, and admittedly, in the interest of full disclosure, are just focusing on the policy and looking at it as black and white. But what I hear you saying is when you look at it medically, it is not as black and white as to whether or not you're complying with that law.
Well, partly the problem is that every state, everything is in turmoil right now. And we don't really know exactly how all of this is going to play out from state to state. Every state seems to have a different policy. For example, Texas, you can't do very much in Texas. You can't even refer a patient out of Texas without having to come under some kind of scrutiny or the potential for scrutiny. So, again, it varies from state to state.
Yeah, well, and that it does. And I think part of the issue that we have as Americans is that for women who are in, what do they call it, childbearing years, have always had that right. And so it feels like something was taken away from you that was never really a right in the first place. And you know, in other countries, like you stated earlier, it's not really a thing. I mean, we're in the same category with like China and North Korea as far as our abortion laws. And that's, you know, I'm not sure I want to be on their team when it comes to anything, but especially not life decisions.
Well, you're right. We don't really want to climb into bed with China for any reason.
Right.
Or for money. I was listening to your show from September 21st. So you made a good point about, you know, China owning our debt.
Well, and they certainly do. But so is there any way to, I don't know, to get amendments to the law, in your opinion, legislatively, to make it more clear for doctors? Because like I said, and actually I'm gonna tell you, I looked it up because I wanted to name the organization where I had done research, and I was actually on a policy call with them not too long ago. It's the American Association of Pro-Life Obstetricians and Gynecologists. Have you heard of them?
No, I haven't, but I ought to hear of them. So we'll go to our Google, and I've got it written down here.
Yeah, that's what I just did, because I remembered being on a call with them, and they were very specific about like what constitutes an abortion and what doesn't constitute an abortion. I was shocked to learn that there was such a thing as pro-life obstetricians, but because I'm politically active and active in the pro-life movement, I was invited on this call. And that's how I came to learn of this organization. So, but go ahead. I'm sorry.
Sounds like something I should at least be familiar with, and thank you for bringing that to my attention.
No, absolutely, and I think it's important that whether you agree with the Roe decision or you disagree, I think it's important that we talk, right, and that we hear each other.
Absolutely. You know, I think that many things can be worked out if we just can have a civil exchange of ideas and respect the other person's perspective. I think that's very important.
Indeed, and as much as I'm pro-life, I completely respect your medical expertise and your experience and what you saw in your career in those medical rooms every single day. And I think it's important for your voice to be heard in that regard. Do you have an opinion? If you say no, I'm totally cool with that. Do you have an opinion on where life begins? Do you, as somebody who's delivered babies, monitored pregnancies, and all that, do you have a medical opinion on that?
Well, to tell you the truth, in that regard, I'm very pro-life. Because as far as I'm concerned, once you've got that embryo in there, that's a life, a potential life. So, yeah, I'm not, I'm not in favor of abortions. I don't do abortions. But I do think that what we're going to see here is legislation bringing back some of the more liberal abortion access. It may take 5 or 10 years, but I think it will happen.
Unfortunately, I think you're right about that. But I think in the interim, I think what needs to happen is they need the voice of people like you to say, listen, here are the medical implications. Here are the special situations medically that need to be addressed.
Well, one of the things you're talking about with this American Association is these are doctors, and they're talking like doctors. For example, they would say, fine, take care of the ectopic pregnancy, take care of the miscarriage, take care of the woman whose life is threatened. I think they would probably say yes to all those things. It's just that not everybody would.
And there's the rub, right? There's the rub, and I think, legislatively, the whole problem with the Roe v. Wade decision was, in my opinion, that it wasn't constitutional. But I completely understand what you're saying, that it caused other problems. I'm not suggesting that it didn't cause other problems, and there needs to be a remedy for that, for sure.
Well, unfortunately, the way it stands now is the remedy is up to the states. Living in North Dakota, of course, everybody's Republican and everybody is pro-life. So, I'm not Republican, and although, like I said, I believe life begins at conception, and I would never do an abortion. I don't like them. But I do think that, again, it needs to be very clear that ectopic pregnancies need to be managed proactively, and any condition leading to the threat of the mother's life should be managed, and miscarriages, they should be managed effectively also.
And I don't think there's anybody who would disagree with you on that. We are in the last 2 minutes of the show. Please share again. I've said it a few times, but your information is just so valuable, and you have so much, medical wisdom in this area. It just should be shared with everybody who's considering a pregnancy or who's just had a baby. I just think it's just so valuable, and I really appreciate you being on the show and answering all my questions this evening. So share away.
I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you and your audience. Incidentally, you have a great picture in the internet.
Thank you.
One final thought I would like to leave with you and your audience.
Please.
That good care costs less. You can't turn that around. In other words, cheap care is best. That doesn't work. But good care costs less. And just remember the 1 day in the hospital postpartum versus the 3 days. That's what I'm talking about.
Yes, I hear exactly what you're saying. Thank you so much, Dr. Allen, for coming on the show. This has been just fantastic, eye-opening. I'm so glad we were able to have that discussion. If you're listening, audience, please check out pregnancyyourway.com and Lindemann, LINDEMANNMD.com. You're going to find some great information there regarding pregnancy, maternal care, all that good stuff. Once again, Dr. Allen, thank you for being on the show this evening. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Melanie.
Yep, indeed. Have a great night. We'll be back. We'll be back on the other side of the break.
Money Talk with Melanie, brought to you by MrCreditRepair.biz.
Money Talk with Melanie features lively discussions of a wide range of global, domestic, and kitchen table financial topics. Money Talk with Melanie on 98.7 The Coast.
The opinions expressed on the following program are strictly those of the guests and do not necessarily reflect the views of WCZT, regional media, coastal broadcasting, personnel, or advertisers. Money Talk with Melanie, brought to you by MrCreditRepair.biz.
Money Talk with Melanie features lively discussions of a wide range of global, domestic, and kitchen table financial topics. Money Talk with Melanie on 98.7 The Coast.
Welcome back to Money Talk with Melanie. We are at the top of the second hour. And if you missed the first hour, shame, shame, shame on you. Our first hour guest was obstetrician and maternity mortality expert, Dr. Allen, also known as the Rural Doc. He has an amazing record of 6,000 deliveries with zero mortality. And it was an absolutely amazing hour of talking about the medical industry, and I do mean industry, talking about how insurance and money is involved. We talked about post-Roe maternal care, and that last segment blew my mind. I'm just saying. So if you missed it, make sure you go back when the podcast is posted. Go back to the 98.7 The Coast website. Go to any other place where you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, all those good places, and make sure you catch that first hour. Also, I just want to, because I don't think I've ever done this, but I just think his information is so valuable. Make sure you go to pregnancyyourway.com or lindemannmd.com if you're pregnant, thinking about getting pregnant, or just had a kid. Just saying, because the man knows what he's talking about. He just really just shares his knowledge now, but he spent 40 years taking care of pregnant moms and delivering babies, and he's got a lot to say, and some of which I think would surprise you. Our second hour guest is e-commerce strategist, completely switching gears, Khierstyn Ross, and she's going to discuss early stage growth for online physical product brands, specifically using Shopify and Kickstarter, which I think are probably some underused modalities as far as virtual selling is concerned. So I'm excited to share with the audience, or to have her share with the audience, what those modalities are, how they can be used to improve your retail business when you sell a physical product. But before we get to that, we're going to talk a little bit about some personal finance. For one of the things that I wanted to share, I shared this with my mom when I was doing show prep earlier today. I was like, hey, Mom, guess what? You're getting a raise, baby. And she was like, what are you talking about? I said, well, Social Security is going to get a cost of living raise, which, of course, in this era where inflation is at 8.3%, this is very important. When compared month to month to 2021, we are up to 8.3% inflation, and 8.5 in July is where it was at its highest. So apparently, for some 70 million Social Security recipients, they're going to do it looks like 8.7% increase in 2023. That's pretty good. I'd like an 8.7% raise. I'm talking to you. My bosses know who they are. Oh, no, I'm just kidding. 8.7% doesn't sound too bad to me. No, but it's a much needed raise for Social Security recipients. Not sure where the Biden administration is getting that money from. Maybe they have a magical money tree, but it's the biggest cost of living increase in 40 years. Last year, they announced that the increase was going to be 5.9%, but it's going to be higher now, and it needs to be due to inflation. I mean, inflation is kicking all of our behinds, I would say. It's pretty bad out there. And if you were already living paycheck to paycheck, you may not have the funds to absorb that kind of inflation. 8.5% across the board, everything that you buy, and it's different depending on the products. It can be much higher. Like eggs are up like 40% because not only do you have inflation, you had a bird flu of some sort that killed a lot of chickens. You had a lot of stuff that went on with eggs. So that cost of living is important for our seniors. And, as someone who loves a senior, I'm glad to see that she's getting a raise, and our fellow seniors are getting a raise. I just hope we do something, maybe make some cuts in places where we don't need to spend money. I mean, just an idea by the administration. You can actually cut. Maybe the federal government is not aware of that. Maybe they're not aware of how that works. But you can actually take money away. You can actually not spend money all the time. Another thing that I wanted to share, and I thought this was an interesting article that I found on Kiplinger on their website, 6 retirement wealth strategies to start young and finish strong. Now, for those of us that are of a certain age, it may be a little late to do the start young part, but maybe we can still finish strong. So here are some tips that can help you do that. Very important first tip. Never think you're too young to need a financial plan. I was on a panel at a County Chamber of Commerce event where I was asked by a young person who was just starting out her career what kind of advice I would give her as far as her finances is concerned, and this is exactly what I said. Have a plan. Get an advisor. Advisors are not for the rich. And I've said it once, I'll say it again. It doesn't matter how much money you make. If you don't manage your money well, you'll always be broke. That is just how it is. You can be a millionaire. That's how come you hear stories of lottery winners and in 2 years they're broke. Poor money management. Doesn't matter how much you have. It matters how well you manage it. A second tip, cash in on the compounding effect of early investment. Compounding interest. I have had trouble with coming up with that term like three times when I was trying to describe it. But compounding interest is very important. So when you are budgeting, you're thinking, oh, I go to Starbucks every day and spend $6 on a coffee and it's not that much money. Well, it's a whole lot of money over time. And you know how much more money it is? If you took that Starbucks money and invested it and subjected it to compound interest. And what that means is interest upon interest. Simple interest is just straight interest. So let's say you saved $100 and you had just regular interest on that. Then you would just get $100 times whatever the interest rate is, and that would be your total. With compound interest, not only do you get interest on that initial $100, but you get interest on the interest. So if 1 year it becomes $125, the compounding interest says you'll get interest on $125 the following year. And in the following year, let's say it's up to $175, you'll get interest on the $175, not just the $100. So the effect of compounding interest, very important. Contribute to a Roth IRA while you still can. Yes, make sure you do that. Roth IRAs are very important. Maximize your employer-sponsored retirement benefits. I think this one is probably the hardest one, right? And what that means is sometimes, especially with private entities, you'll have a company that says, if you invest 5% in your retirement, we'll match that 5%. And you're like, I don't want to contribute 5% because that's a lot of money out of my paycheck. But you're not thinking about the other side of that, is the fact that your company is literally giving you free money. And again, that free money is subjected to compounded interest. That's why you're losing a lot more money than you think when you don't take advantage of maximizing employer-sponsored retirement benefits. So make sure you do that. Consider hidden retirement savings strategies, or HSAs. They're called health savings accounts. Those are pre-tax accounts. You may want to do that. Anything that's pre-tax that you can take advantage of to get Uncle Sam out your pockets, do it. Just saying. And as young people, well, I remember being young. I'm just like, kind of going back to when I was young. I remember thinking, that's a lot of money. I need to spend that money. I need that money for bills. Believe me when I tell you, as a 52-year-old woman now, you will need that money, and those years fly by faster than you think. Have a steady hand and recalibrate as needed. In other words, make sure you're managing your money. Make sure you're paying attention to how you're spending your money. Make sure that you're budgeting, that you have a plan, that you have goals. Don't just go paycheck to paycheck doing whatever you want. Actually do the math. Very important. I think I shared last week that I talked about basic budgeting and how you do it, and that I thought I was doing okay because I was putting away a certain amount. But when I actually did the math, following the 50-30-20 rule, and the 20 part of that is save 20% of your paycheck, I wasn't even in the ballpark of 20%. And I thought I was putting a nice little chunk in there. But when I actually did the math, I was not. So make sure you do the math, make sure you recalibrate, make sure you re-strategize and pay attention to your money. I hope you found that useful. It is 8:10. We're up against the commercial break. When we come back, we will have our second hour guest, Khierstyn Ross. She's going to talk to us about Kickstarter and Shopify and how to maximize selling our online products that way. We'll be back on the other side of the break.
Money Talk with Melanie, brought to you by MrCreditRepair.biz.
Money Talk with Melanie features entrepreneurs, CEOs, and politicos who are experts in their fields. Money Talk with Melanie. Money Talk with Melanie on 98.7 The Coast.
Money Talk with Melanie, brought to you by MrCreditRepair.biz.
Money Talk with Melanie features lively discussions of a wide range of global, domestic, and kitchen table financial topics. Money Talk with Melanie on 98.7 The Coast.
Welcome back to Money Talk with Melanie. Our guest this hour is Khierstyn Ross. Khierstyn is an e-commerce strategist that specializes in fast, early-stage growth for online physical product brands using Shopify and Kickstarter. Through her work, she's helped launch and scale multiple seven-figure brands. Her clients have been featured in the New York Times, Forbes, Shark Tank, Dragon's Den, and many other leading publications. Khierstyn believes in empowering D2C product creators to build a business that gives them the freedom to fund and create the lifestyle they want to live on their terms. And without further ado, Ms. Khierstyn Ross.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I am so excited to have you on the show this hour. I don't know if you caught the first hour, but it was a little intense. So
I did not. Okay. I was getting some R&R because I've been up since 5:30 this morning, so I want to take a break to be fresh for this.
I can appreciate that. I think naps and resting is very underrated. I will tell you, I take a nap whenever possible. I usually take a nap before the show, I'm not going to lie. I'm just...
Oh, that's good, because you have to be fresh and relaxed, otherwise it's going to be tense and not a good conversation, right?
Yeah, yes, indeed. I didn't have time to nap today, but that doesn't seem to have slowed my mouth down any, to many people's chagrin, I'm sure. Is there anything that I didn't mention in your bio that you'd like to share with the audience?
Well, I life outside of business, I do like challenging myself. So if there are any triathletes out there, I have completed a Ironman and hiked Kilimanjaro.
What?
Because I like to, I like to do cool stuff outside of work because I'm like super goal focused. So for me to like stay in shape, I'm like, I need a big goal. So I like sign up to do those cool things. So those are other things like outside of business that I'm like super proud of. And you should be super proud of that. I'm someone who looks at my Apple Watch and says, do a 20-minute walk to finish that circle. I think not, Apple Watch. Where's the Dunkin' Donuts? Yeah, but sometimes it's good. It's just like it takes me a long time to get momentum, but like it was so weird because I was very like active, and then the pandemic hit, and then I finally have like gotten off the couch and I'm back at the gym with a routine.
Excellent. I love that.
Sometimes you just like keep those healthy habits. So
there's nothing wrong, and you do feel better if you exercise. Let's just be honest.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So much. Sleep better mood, endorphins, all that good stuff.
All that good stuff. Okay, I want you to tell the audience about Shopify and Kickstarter. Some people probably have never heard of these platforms. What in the world are they? Why should we care? Tell us.
Yeah, great question. So I work with people that are launching, they sell products online. So if you think of like what you buy on Amazon or when you're doing any sort of online shopping, I help the brands that you shop at actually launch those products and build businesses online. So when you look at what Shopify is a platform where you can build your e-commerce website and really sell your products from that. So Shopify is like a website builder for e-commerce brands.
Oh.
And so when you say like, oh, I sell products online, it's like, okay, cool. Are you like, if you have your own storefront online, you're likely selling through Shopify or a similar platform.
Really? See, I had no idea. I did not know that's what Shopify was. Now, I've heard that Shopify, like people use Shopify for drop shipping and stuff like that?
Yes, exactly. So they will set up a storefront where they can sell their products through drop shipping, which just essentially means that they have identified a manufacturer that already has products made, but then you essentially are a reseller. So you're like selling somebody else's products under your brand through your website on Shopify.
Excellent. Okay, I got it.
Yeah.
Now, apparently there's two kinds of Shopify. You have Shopify and Shopify Plus. Is there?
Yeah, so that's just Shopify Plus, like they have different plans available depending on the level of like customer support you want, the depth of analytics you get on your website and stuff like that. So I wouldn't worry too much about that, but like Shopify Plus is like their premium customer service where Shopify team actually gives you a designated account manager to help you with your store.
Oh, so, that's interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. You're making me say
So,
now, would you
online? Yeah.
Would you consider platforms like Shopify to be like easy from a technology standpoint? Like, if you do you have to be like Steve Jobs to know how to operate Shopify, or can like the average person with kind of like average computer savvy be able to run a Shopify site?
Yeah, so that's one of the best parts about Shopify is it's made for people who don't, they're not developers, right? Like you don't need custom coding. They make it really easy to build the website and actually like get into it. So I would say like from what you are able to do on Shopify, you don't need any prior website building experience to be able to actually do it. Of course, like anything, there is a learning curve, but you don't need to be a developer. You don't need to hire a developer to get a basic Shopify store up, and there's no coding required. So it's pretty, Shopify, I think, is my favorite platform because they have the best features available to e-commerce brands without needing the tech degree, so to speak, right?
The tech degree.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you don't have to be a junior website designer to use Shopify.
Absolutely not. No.
Okay. Like I said,
of course you can hire one if you want, but
yeah. Listen, I taught web page design on a high school level for a few years, and I didn't love it. I'm not gonna lie. Yeah. So like Money Talk with Melanie, not my work. That is the work of my web guy, not me. Because it is not fun. At least in my opinion. Yeah. Like if you enjoy that kind of thing, then maybe so. But I did not enjoy it.
Yeah, it depends. Like if you are someone that is a funded business, like you have investment, or you have someone on your team who's more tech literate, then you should absolutely get them to do that. But if you're like solopreneur, bootstrapping, just getting started, then you will likely want to do the basic site build yourself. And Shopify does make it very easy to do that.
Now, do you find Shopify to be cost effective for just about anybody, or does it depend like where you are in your business?
It is very cost effective. Where it can add up is like the basic Shopify plan is $29 a month. And that gives you access to essentially host your website, have your website on Shopify. But what some Shopify sellers, where it can get deep into the pockets is like for you to be able to customize your website. So let's just say you want a fancy pop-up, or you want certain apps that let you do certain things to further customize your website. Mm-hmm. The subscriptions that you have with the apps can add up. So I think that the basic Shopify plan and a couple of recommended apps that you will have to pay for are like super, super cost effective, but it can definitely get into like the hundreds of dollars a month for app subscriptions if you aren't running a lean ship. So I would just say like it it scales really well with you, but you just want to be careful not to have like too many paid apps if you're not using all of them or whatnot.
So I think what you're, at least I want to make sure that I understand what you're saying. So for example, and I'm just throwing out examples. I'm not saying that this is specifically on Spotify. So for example, if you wanted to have, use 3 apps, PayPal, Venmo, and what's the other one? Zelle. That might cost one price, but if you wanted to also add, Apple Pay and all these other modalities to help your customers be able to pay, that's going to add up because each of those is an app that you're adding to your site.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense to me. Or at least, in my defense, or full disclosure, I should say, I taught computer applications for a while in addition to web page design. So I'm not in this totally blind. So, but I want to make sure that I'm explaining this as clearly as I possibly can.
Absolutely.
Now, do you think there are advantages to using like the e-store, like a Shopify, as opposed to a brick and mortar in this day? And it seems like an old-fashioned question, but I think brick and mortars can still be a thing, depending.
Mm-hmm. I feel that, like, if I were to set up a new store with products, I wouldn't go brick and mortar in the beginning.
Okay. Personally,
I think there is a spot for brick and mortar, but you'll have something like, I think it was, okay. So for example, when you start an online store and you only sell products on that storefront, you're what's called a direct-to-consumer seller, and that's just what you do. You sell directly through your website. But we've seen some brands that, because they've done so well on their website in a big city, for example, like let's just say you've got a ton of customers from the Toronto area, that might be a signal that tells you you should probably test a physical location with a pop-up shop to see what your foot traffic looks like to come in. And if that performs well, you might want to think of a permanent retail location. So I think that there is merit in it, but I like the idea of starting online as a way to build up your brand presence, get your customer base, and then see if it makes sense to open up a shop so that people can come in and actually like interact with your product.
Okay, that makes sense. That actually makes a ton of sense. Yeah. And you can really kind of gauge, I would imagine, like, what the interest is in your product or your invention or whatever it is that you're selling.
Exactly.
Yep. That before you go investing in a brick and mortar, paying rent or a mortgage or whatever that is, thinking that is going to be okay. It may not.
Yeah, definitely. So whereas like brick and mortar really limits you geographically, whereas if you're, say, selling in the U.S., you have an entire country at your disposal, right?
Right. And you can, now, does Spotify limit you to just selling in the U.S., or can you sell abroad as well?
Nope. You can sell anywhere you want.
Okay, so anywhere in the world you can do yeah. I was going to say Spotify. I say Spotify so often. Shopify.
You're not the first person to mix it up.
Well, they're so really, really close. I'm just saying. No, but yeah, they are. So I'm liking the Shopify idea, but it would not be good. So you focus on physical brands, but you don't think, as far as Shopify is concerned, you don't think that would work for a service? Like, and I'm not on Shopify, so I don't know. Like, if you wanted to do, say, like video tutorials and sell a class, would that not be a good modality for that?
That completely is. Like, Shopify's really, really great for e-commerce, but e-commerce means selling something online, whether it's a digital or a physical product. So if you wanted to, like, we work with brands that sell, say, a physical journal as well as courses, and they sell them both on the same Shopify website.
Ooh.
So they're absolutely is like a point for if you have courses, digital products, etc., that you're mixing with physical. Shopify is going to be like an excellent platform. If you're purely selling courses, there are better platforms that are built specifically for digital products, but Shopify can do digital.
Okay, interesting. I did not know this. I am learning a lot, and I've been doing this for a while. And when I saw your profile, though, I was like, ooh, Shopify and Kickstarter. I don't know enough about that. And if I, who am involved in this every day, doesn't know enough about that, that means my audience probably doesn't either. And that's why I invited you on the show. Now, Kickstarter is an even bigger deal. So we're going to be up against a commercial break soon, I'm pretty sure. Okay. Or no. Okay, cool. My producer just waved at me. We got 5 minutes. We're good. So explain what Kickstarter is, because that's kind of a different deal than Shopify.
Yes. So where Shopify is kind of where you set up your shop to sell products and you grow your brand. Kickstarter is a product launch platform. So let's say you come to me and you're like, I want to sell a journal. I want to create a journal and launch it to my audience, but on Kickstarter. The reason you would do that is because when you look at the design cost, which will be $5,000, say, for that, plus you want to buy 1,000 journals for inventory, let's just say like the bill to bring this journal to market is going to be $25,000. And you look and you're like, well, I could fund this myself, or I can do a Kickstarter campaign. And a Kickstarter campaign allows you to actually raise capital for new products. So what would happen is you would do a marketing campaign, launch your product on Kickstarter, and you would get people from your audience, the Kickstarter platform, random people online that see your product and pre-order your product. So over the course of your launch, you're able to actually get that $25,000 that you need for inventory funded through pre-orders. So Kickstarter is a platform that allows you to get your idea funded and validated by using pre-order money from people that you're getting as customers.
Ooh, and this is what you're describing is also known as crowdfunding, but Kickstarter is kind of a modality for you to crowdfund, right?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. And so I wanted to kind of slow that down. It's the teacher in me. I used to be a teacher. I wanted to kind of slow that down so that people understood what we were talking about. So when you hear about crowdfunding, what Khierstyn just described is what crowdfunding is, and then she's saying that Kickstarter in particular is the one that you, kind of one of your faves, I think is what you're saying.
Yeah, they are the largest crowdfunding platform on the planet.
Oh, okay.
Right now, so,
is there, would you say that there's reasons why Kickstarter is so popular in comparison to other crowdfunding platforms?
Yeah, I would say like Kickstarter and Indiegogo tie for top spots with this. And then you have a third one, which is GoFundMe. But GoFundMe is for like personal campaigns. So if I'm trying to raise money to go to Harvard or to get my vet bill covered, that's like GoFundMe. So, but when you look at Kickstarter, Indiegogo as the top two, they were really the first crowdfunding platforms to market. And so that's the reason why they are the largest. I think we hear the most about Kickstarter just because they've had wild success over the last 12 years or so. And then over the last decade, we've had other smaller crowdfunding platforms crop up where, say, Kickstarter is the largest marketplace where you have all kinds of products. So you have tech, you have journals, you have theater productions, you have like the whole gambit. Whereas other smaller crowdfunding platforms have cropped up to serve specific niches. So you might have like a crowdfunding platform that specifically helps food startups get their food products funded. And just because of the nature of that, just being a smaller demographic, it's going to be a smaller platform.
Okay, that makes sense. And I'll tell you, I had heard of crowdfunding before, and I think years ago, like when it first jumped off, I had somebody on the show when it was just a podcast and not on terrestrial radio as well as a podcast. And I was like, man, who's going to do that? That's not going to be popular. Shows how much I know. That's not going to be. How's that going to be a thing? People are just going to give you money because they're interested in your product? That sounds weird. The product that literally hasn't been made yet?
Yeah. Funny story, I was at a meetup group listening to a speaker like 8 years ago now, and he was rambling on about this thing called crowdfunding. And I was like, what? I don't get it. That sounds really dumb.
Right.
And little did I know, here we are. I made a career out of it.
Exactly. Same. When I first heard it, I thought the same thing. I was like, why would somebody pay for a product they can't even see, that's invisible? That is literally just a thought. Why would you do that?
Yeah, but then you see people do it, and you're like, oh, there is something to this. And then you understand the psychology behind it, and then,
Right, here we are years later, like, oh, that's really a thing, and like really a super lucrative thing while we're at it. Oh.
It really is, like, but yeah, people, like, will do Kickstarter campaigns that raise, like, the most recent one this last 12 months broke the Kickstarter record. I think they raised about $50 million for a novel.
Ma'am, I thought you were going to say, I really thought you were going to say $50,000. We're up against a break.
No, like, yeah, but we're up against a break, so we can continue.
Yeah, we'll talk about it on the other side of the break. We're on with Khierstyn Ross. We're talking about crowdfunding. In the beginning, we talked a little bit about Shopify, but we're going to dig into Kickstarter on the how-tos on the other side of the break. We'll be back.
Money Talk with Melanie, brought to you by MrCreditRepair.biz.
This is important because it's your money. Your money. Money Talk with Melanie. Money Talk with Melanie on 98.7 The Coast.
Money Talk with Melanie, brought to you by MrCreditRepair.biz.
Money Talk with Melanie on 98.7 The Coast.
Welcome back to Money Talk with Melanie. Our guest this hour is Khierstyn Ross. Oh, by the way, before I get back to my guest, I want to give a shout out to Robert Houston, MrCreditRepair.biz himself, my main man who has supported Money Talk with Melanie since its infancy, and I appreciate you so much. Just want to say that from the bottom of my heart. I'm sure I will be chatting with you later. But back to Khierstyn Ross. So before the break, we were talking about Kickstarter and how it's a crowdfunding platform. And you said, as a matter of fact, it recently broke a record. And when you started with 50, I thought you were going to say $1,000. Repeat what you said before the break.
Well, I was wrong. The number was actually 41,700,000 in pre-orders.
And what was it?
So there's a prolific author named Brian Sanderson who has released several books over the last decade. And so he actually it was a viral campaign because he did no marketing for it. He just dropped it to his audience on the day before launch to say, hey, surprise, I've written 5 novels for you and you can pre-order it on Kickstarter tomorrow. And the thing it exploded he got about 185,000 pre-orders for this. And like, he wasn't the first campaign to break the $1 million mark. Like, there have been hundreds of 7-figure campaigns done over the years.
Wow.
So
I had no idea. And the fact that this was for a novel, like, he must be a kick-butt author. Like, I'm just saying, like, it wasn't for an air fryer. It wasn't for the latest iPad. This is for a novel.
Yeah, for a novel. And he had a really good, he had about 250,000 YouTube subscribers going into this. So he definitely had a good online community and a really good track record and a rabid fan base. So he definitely, he's kind of like the perfect Kickstarter case study because he's not a first-time entrepreneur. He has some skin in the game. He has some street cred. And yeah, he just kind of did this thing, and it's a really cool case study to look at.
That is awesome. I love that. Okay, so for the novices out here who don't, who aren't that author, but would like to start a Kickstarter campaign, one of the first things that you have to do, I would imagine, is describe your project. Describe what you want money for. And there's a skill in asking for money, right? But this is a very specific kind of thing. So how would you go into it? Like, how do you need to be detailed? Can you be vague? Like, how do you start?
Yeah. So we started about how to pitch the product, but then I think we should also talk about the build-up, because the one big misconception is when I come on here saying you can raise $1 million. Like, there's a reason why Kickstarter is one of the go-to funding platforms for small businesses that don't want to raise investment. But when I say that, someone's like, wow, it sounds so easy. I can just kind of launch any product and be a millionaire. So I do want to talk about like the work that goes into it to set proper expectations and make sure that like it's a good choice for someone to go on.
Definitely.
But I first want to answer your question about like how do you present the product so that you can get money. So actually the big mistake that people make if you picture a Kickstarter campaign, picture like opening your phone and seeing a product with a buy now button. Right? And there's information about the product, who it's for, what it does, blah, 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 blah. But a big mistake that people make is they assume that because you're raising pre-order money on Kickstarter that your page, and when you talk about the product, is all about why you need the funding and what you're going to do with the money once people give you the money. That's the biggest mistake you can make, because what you have to do is when you are selling a product, you have to pitch it in terms of what is in it for the customer. Why should someone buy your product? So it's not like, hey, help me raise $20,000 to pay for inventory. Instead, if we're saying like, I'm bringing a coffee machine to market, what you're pitching it as is like, are you tired of buying expensive coffee machines that break all the time and are hard to clean? Well, we're actually releasing a new product that is half the price and easier to clean and makes barista-level tasting coffee. That's why we're bringing this amazing new thing to Kickstarter. And when you pre-order now, you can get this awesome new thing. So what you're doing is you're positioning it as it's real product marketing, and you're having to sell the product before you even talk about, and that's why we need you to pre-order so that we can pay for inventory, blah, blah, blah. So you have to frame everything on your marketing campaign in terms of what is in it for the customer and why somebody needs your product.
Okay, that makes
and that's the story you're telling.
Okay, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. And I would imagine that people go into it thinking, "Woohoo! Let me jump on Kickstarter and get some money," and probably write this like not awesome description of what they want the money for.
Yeah, because another thing, and like what I just said about pitching it in terms of what's in it for them, like that even goes for like when you're pitching your product to raise capital, is like, why should the investors invest in you? It has to be about them and what they need. But when you talk about like, all right, so you have this product, you know you want to do a Kickstarter campaign, and you know you need $20,000 in pre-orders to bring it to market. So at that point, another huge mistake that people make is they assume that because Kickstarter gets millions of visitors a month, because it's a huge platform, has this big community, that all you have to do is just have a good product and then just kind of launch and hope for the best. That just won't work, because Kickstarter has hundreds of products on it at any given day. And if you just launch your product, you're actually going to be buried on the platform and nobody's going to find you. So what you need to do is like work the system so that you have to actually, just say you know that you're launching a product in February on Kickstarter. You need to actually start marketing today, say like in October, 3 to 4 months out, to start building up awareness, building buzz, building excitement, and really building your audience of people who are excited to buy your product, so that when February comes, you have a list of people ready to buy your product.
Okay.
And the reason you do this, and like the number we want to shoot for is like, say you need to raise $20,000. Assume that you need to, within the first couple of days from your pre-launch efforts, you want to bring in about 20 to 30% of that, so that when you launch and you get some traction, Kickstarter's algorithm is going to look at your project and say, oh, cool, they've got people buying. Looks like a popular product. People seem to like it on our platform. We should boost this. We should give this more attention. And so when you prove to Kickstarter that you have a popular project because of the pre-launch that you've done, because of the sales that you are bringing in early, that's going to help the platform actually rank you higher on their website, which makes you easier to find, which easier to find means that's how you're starting to get discovered by people that are just on their platform looking at gadgets and looking at stuff.
Okay.
So and then things start to kind of snowball from there. So how to have that kind of success is by seeding it with getting traction from your own audience in the first couple of days, so that Kickstarter's platform can then say, okay, we're going to boost this because it's working.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, now here's my second question, probably one of the most important ones, right? How do you determine how much money you need to raise? And is that relevant to how successful your campaign is going to be?
Oh, yeah. Oh, my gosh, yes. So everyone's first campaign, until they get a bit more experience, they right away are like, I want to do 7 figures. They're like, I got to do $1 million because $1 million sounds amazing. And they're like, and I was like, okay, cool. So we actually break down what $1 million looks like. And it turns out that for most people, they don't need $1 million. There's actually bigger problems with the larger the campaign it is, because the more pre-orders you get, the more obligations you have to fulfill, right?
Yes.
So if you have a 7-figure campaign to actually raise $1 million on Kickstarter, it means that you need way, way, way more upfront work. And what you're going to find is that companies that raise 7 figures end up putting about $200,000 to $250,000 in marketing before the launch to build things up to a point where they're going to be able to hit that kind of traction. So $1 million campaigns can be hit. Of course, it happens all the time, but the higher you're looking to go in terms of funds raised, the more you need to put into the campaign.
Okay, that certainly makes sense. Yes, that makes sense, especially considering what you just said about how the platform works and the algorithms, which makes perfect sense. They're not going to, show people stuff that they don't want to see all the time. They're going to show people what you want to see and raise the popularity of the platform and therefore help your product. That makes sense. Yeah.
And I want to look at 2 very different cases, because your question about how do you figure out how much you actually need depends on the kind of product. So if we take a simple product like a journal has design costs. Let's say arbitrarily you need to pay a designer $5,000 to design it. But then you need inventory. And when you're working with your manufacturer, the manufacturer is going to give you different ordering limits. So say our minimum order is 100 or our minimum order is 1,000, right? And the less you order, the more expensive it is per journal. So what a lot of people in the beginning want to do is they want to just order the highest amount, say they want to order 1,000 because their per unit price is a lot better than if they only order 100. But the more inventory you buy, the more money you're going to have to raise. So if you're just looking to test and do a really small run, the journal might just be that what you need is say 5,000 for design plus 10,000 for that first order to get the minimum amount that you can get from the manufacturer. In which case it's cool, we need to raise 15,000.
Okay, and if you did that, say you raise that initial amount, can you go back in and do a second campaign for a second run? Do people do that?
Yeah, so you can, but there's actually cleaner ways to do it where once you launch your product on Kickstarter, you can actually continue pre-order sales right after that point on your own website. So you don't actually have to do a second crowdfunding campaign. You can just keep selling after Kickstarter.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, for sure.
Yeah.
Now, it's my understanding that on Kickstarter, you can offer people who back your product different rewards.
Yes, that's right.
And how does that work?
So if we take a journal, a reward is a different package people can buy at different price points. So you say a journal campaign has 4 different reward levels. Reward level 1 for $25, you get 1 journal. Reward level 2 for $50, you get 2 journals. For $100, you get 4. For the $500 package, you get all 4 journals plus a private coaching session, we'll say. So generally what brands... Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say I like the private coaching sessions, and many of my guests, depending on what kind of product they're involved with, will offer that, like a private coaching session, just for Money Talk with Melanie listeners or something like that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So something like that. So rewards allow you just to charge more and give more value, whether that's and like Kickstarter has been used for digital products in the past or courses, so you would just essentially have multiple things based on kind of what you're putting into each reward level.
Okay, now will Kickstarter do any project? Like, can any Joe Schmo just jump on Kickstarter and propose a project, and Kickstarter will go ahead and post it, or are there is there criteria?
Yeah. So back in the day, back in 2008, 2009, when crowdfunding was just getting started, it was like Joe Schmo could, I remember the classical potato salad recipe that was posted, and someone raised about, I think it was $50,000 or $80,000 to produce the world's best potato salad recipe.
What?
And that was back in the day when it was Wild Wild West, before kind of criteria that they have now. But because crowdfunding used to be, hey, I got this cool idea, and people just raised a bunch of money, that ran into a whole bunch of problems early on with people not delivering or scams or just whatever. So now crowdfunding platforms have evolved to have criteria. So specifically with Kickstarter, you have to submit your project for approval before it gets listed on the platform. The approving criteria is that you must show proof of your capability of delivering the product. So what that means is you can't just have a sketch of a product that you maybe one day want to produce. You need to show proof of a real prototype that you have developed to show that it's a real product that you're actually going to deliver. So that's one thing, because it was just too easy before for anyone to list a product and run with the money and not actually deliver. So now they're really trying to protect consumers with proof that projects at launch have the ability to deliver. And of course, there's prohibited categories. Most recently, you're able to now fund or launch sex toys, but you can't have tobacco or cannabis products or any guns or any of those prohibited categories that are, pretty, what you're going to see that no Facebook, Google, et cetera, doesn't want you to promote those kind of products anyway. So it's pretty standard for what they won't let on the platform.
Well, it's a good thing that they're not, because no one is smoking weed now. So that's, thank God that they're protecting them.
I know. We dodged a bullet with that.
Yeah, thank goodness Kickstarter for good looking out. So we only have a couple minutes left in the show. Please tell people what you do is you help people do this. You're a pro, and that's what you do. Tell people where to find you and how they can avail themselves of your services.
Yeah, so we specialize in working with early-stage brands that are either pre-launch to $0 to $3 million a year. So if you are someone that needs help validating a product or launching a product, whether that's on Kickstarter, your own website, or building your e-commerce brand, our home online is launchandscale.co, not .com, it's .co. And we've got we've got hundreds of videos on my YouTube channel, which you can go to just by searching my name or Launch and Scale on YouTube. You can subscribe and really start that way. So those would be the two places I would say best to start
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. Look out for the podcast, which will drop in a couple of days, and I'll tag you in all your social media. So if you're just joining us, we were just listening to Khierstyn Ross, who is an e-commerce strategist, and she was giving us the ins and outs of using Shopify and Kickstarter. So if you missed it, you want to go back and listen to it. Thanks so much, Khierstyn, for being on the show tonight.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was awesome.
No, this was great. I appreciate you so much. We'll be back on the other side of the break.
Money Talk with Melanie features lively discussions of a wide range of global, domestic, and kitchen table financial topics. Guest interviews include entrepreneurs, CEOs, and politicos who are experts in their fields. Be sure to listen up. This is important because it's your money. Your money. Be sure to listen to Money Talk with Melanie. Money Talk with Melanie. Wednesdays, 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern Time on 98.7 The Coast.
Money Talk with Melanie, brought to you by MrCreditRepair.biz. Money Talk with Melanie, brought to you by MrCreditRepair.biz.
Money Talk with Melanie features lively discussions of a wide range of global, domestic, and kitchen table financial topics. Money Talk with Melanie on 98.7 The Coast.
Welcome back to the end of the show. I want to thank everyone for listening. If you are listening to this as a podcast, thank you very much. Thank you, Mark, for working the boards. I want to also thank my guest, Dr. Allen, who is also known as the Rural Doc, and I want to thank Khierstyn Ross as well. Next week on Money Talk with Melanie, Regina Agia, president of Garden State Initiative, tells us why it's time to bury the death tax. And then Eva Rosenberg, the internet's tax mama, will return to Money Talk with Melanie to discuss theft, casualty, and romance scams. Are they deductible? Remember, all of this is important because, after all, it's your money.